been a long time that I have not spoken or put up a video for you all, because the situation in Ukraine and Russia is quite stable, as also the Taiwan conflict is quite stable. However, I just want to take your focus towards, you know, the warfare as such. And I have just put up one slide for you, self-explanatory. Just go through it, have a look at it. The war, every nation is in a state of war all the time, and some kind of an irregular warfare is always on, and mostly economic. And nation is always preparing for a war.
In Ukraine and Russia war, and I just really want to take you all back to that state of war, which is now finally culminated into a conventional war. What's actually happening, and which had been happening with Russia and NATO or the Western countries for a long period of time, and it had started. It got aggravated after Russian occupation of Crimea in 2014, and continuously they were in a state of war. Now, this state of war, most of the nations, today modern nations, are in state of war in some form or the other. Like, for example, India is in state of war with Pakistan, China, and probably some other more countries we really don't know, because most of the wars are being fought in a very hidden manner below the conventional wars, or some kind of irregular warfare is always there. And on top of this list is the economic war. Now, if you remember, in 1990s, the early 1990s, ASEAN country had started becoming very strong. They started forming a bloc, and which was inclined towards security umbrella, inclined towards creating a currency which was to be used by the Asian nations as trading currency, and to the extent that some of the leaders spoke out of step that time, and not realizing that there are superpowers in this world, and there is a superpower which has got its own interest in these areas, and they will come down on them in a different manner. So what happened? Late 1990s, there was an economic meltdown. The complete area, the economy was ruined by a stroke of market manipulation. Now, amount of loans, and there are systems which are put into place by these big players to make sure that when the time comes, you are made to realize that don't speak out of step. And you can see thereafter ASEAN countries are on a lower ebb. They have continued to do well in a different form, but the kind of euphoria, the kind of energy which they were exhibiting that time has actually died down. Can you relate to a modern today's situation? In India, you can see a few days back, there is this Hindenburg report which has come out against Adani Enterprises or Adani Group of companies. And Adani Group of companies are today the leading entrepreneurs or the conglomerate of India. And anything which comes against it is kind of an irregular war. And the timing is so precise that it just happened just before their FPO as also budget of India. Simultaneously, Chinese economy has opened up. So the players have calculated the timing in such a manner that today's investment, which is coming to India, probably can be shifted to the Chinese market. And India is made to realize, don't speak out of your way. Don't get out of the step, because there are superpowers in the world. They'll try and make you realize that once you start supporting Russia in Russia-Ukraine conflict on some premise or the other, or even if you are making statements which are beyond your status at the moment, then you will have problems. And the problems they are likely to create. A great nation will come bounce back from this. A great nation and will hold hand of such companies which are under threat, and people have to come together to starve off the challenges like that. So that is the kind of war which we are faced, and the kind of action which is required at each individual level, how to defeat the design of enemy. Now, I'm just trying to say economic war is very critical, which is always taking place. Then I have just shown you this triangle, that is the war with conventional forces will start. Once this situation is created in such a manner, the economic war is already on. You see, Russia, Ukraine, their economic war was already on. Russia had prepared great deal to fight this war economically, and they have done well that way. Similarly, Americans and Western nations had been pumping a lot of money in Ukraine, but unfortunately, that money had not been utilized properly, most probably by Ukraine. So they had the initial setback, or the time which was available to them, that is 7 8 years, which was available post 2014 when they got serious, was not good enough to prepare for Russian onslaught. Then looking at the logistics, so every nation is always in a state of war and is trying to prepare logistics to fight a conventional war. Unless until logistics are in place, you have the war wastage reserves, you have your weapon systems which are created, their spare parts are organized, and there are systems, there are nations which are supposed to be there. Like in case of India, we have a great amount of dependencies on Russia, so we really cannot get away from Russia, which let's say Americans realize, but don't speak about it too much. That's what they want to say. So I would always recommend diplomats to remain diplomats and let these kind of talks, which are a little toxic in nature, be left to people like defense minister or some kind of a minister who's a little out of the way and is really not affecting the overall scenario. But diplomats must ensure that those basic rules of diplomacy are always maintained. Now, so then this irregular warfare is always on. So logistics being prepared, economic war preparation there. There is a C3R communication and information and control system is being organized, which is very important, right from top to bottom level. Communication, control, and information system is very critical for fighting a war, which is today electronic based, information based. Intelligence has to be derived out of it. Great amount of emphasis has to be put onto the air defense C3I system, as also any other force. And theaterization is very important for a nation. So these kind of things are actions are always taking place, and the enemy is always trying to put pressure on you to degrade or to create obstacles to create these systems. Simultaneously, a nation is trying to always flex its muscles by showing technology. Like the Russians had been for years and years before this war had been trying to show the kind of missiles they had developed, the weapon system they had developed. They had been selling to the whole world, as also they were trying to put pressure on the West or other countries not to interfere when they go in for an action. And of course, today when we are listening that Boris Johnson is saying that Putin had told him, had threatened him that he will strike with missiles in case Britain comes to aid of Ukraine or Britain tries to interfere. Then psychological operations are always on. The tremendous amount of psychological operations are taking place all the while. Today, social media is a very important tool in psychological warfare, and they are also putting a lot of pressure on the leaders at various levels. So, PSYOPs is totally directed towards the command and control system of the nation through the people. As also, see, all wars are people centric. If you break the will of the people in a country, the chances of that country standing during the wartime is very difficult. Ukraine has done well this way, that irrespective of the kind of psychological pressure they have undergone, the country has withstood and fought well. As also, some of the units have really fought well to try and make sure that Russians really cannot have a straight victory. Then nations are always involved, or inimical forces are always involved in trying to change the demographic nature of a country. So really, you don't have to fight a war. Most of these actions are taking place in such a manner that you really don't have to fight a war, but you can defeat a country. If you can change the demography of of a country's population somehow, then mostly that people-centric focus, is aligned towards you. So there are a lot of actions which are always taking place in a country, and I would focus on economy, demographic control, psi operations, development of technology, and development of wherewithal to fight a war. And finally, when all these things are in place and you have not been able to achieve your aim with these methods, which are part of the larger umbrella, then you have, like Russia, in case of Russia, they have this circle of weapons of mass destruction. Now, these are being used to scare people off, to try not to interfere, or when they are fighting a conventional war, as a strategic asset to be used when the situation starts going or slipping up from their hand. So till today, in case of Russia and Ukraine, this situation is not a reason. But Russia doesn't mind time and again telling the world that it has got nuclear weapons and it will use in case it is required. So it will, use all kinds of semantics to say and why they are not using it. But that's what it is. And finally, the conventional forces come into action. We'll be talking about these conventional forces within this presentation one by one, the major aspects which have come out of this conventional fighting, and I'll be restricting myself to plains and built up area because the war has mostly been in plains and built up area. Situation, war fighting system, and how you want to go about carrying out your operations in different terrain or in mountains, let's say in jungles or in deserts, is quite different from what is going to happen in plains.